U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham is creating a bill to ban abortion nationally. He must have been MIA when the Supreme Court already said that a national decision on abortion was inappropriate. The Guardian published an article saying that American voters just sent a crystal clear message. They believe in abortion rights. No shit. So much so that many TikTokers are celebrating their abortions.
We're celebrating them now.
The bulk of this episode will be focused on abortion rights. No matter whether you play for Team Choice or Team Life, there's a ton of conflict, and understanding how we got here is critical to understanding where we're going to go next. My name is Chris, and this is the Think Report. Okay, let's start with Lindsey Graham. According to lindseygraham.com, in the United States Senate, South Carolina's Lindsey Graham has earned a reputation as a conservative, a problem solver, and a leader who gets things done. Good thing he's not known for reading. This ding-dong sees the Supreme Court strike down Roe V Wade, and in spite of the actual words written in the opinion by Justice Alito, believes that he can pass a law that bans abortion nationally.
So we will be introducing this bill as of like right now. People will join. I hope it will be bipartisan. And we will have a debate, if we're allowed to bring it up, as to why we're doing what we're doing. Abortion is a contentious issue. Post-Dobbs, America's got to make some decisions. And the first thing I would say about the Dobbs decision is that abortion's not banned in America. It's left up to elected officials in America to define the issue. You have states have the ability to do it at the state level, and we have the ability in Washington to speak on this issue if we choose. I have chosen to speak.
When politicians do things like this, it adds to the piles of evidence that politicians often know very little about their own roles. Look, the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade because it determined it didn't have the authority to rule on a nationwide avocation for abortion. That also means that it must not have the authority to enact a nationwide rejection of abortion. It doesn't magically obtain authority depending on your agenda. It just doesn't have the authority. Here's what Justice Alito's ruling actually says. For the first 185 years after the adoption of the Constitution, each state was permitted to address this issue, abortion, in accordance with the views of its citizens. Then in 1973, this court decided Roe v. Wade. Even though the Constitution makes no mention of abortion, the court held that it confers a broad right to obtain one. At the time of Roe, 30 states still prohibited abortion at all stages. In the years prior to that decision, about a third of the states had liberalized their laws, but Roe abruptly ended that political process. It imposed the same highly restrictive regime on the entire nation, and it effectively struck down the abortion laws of every single state. There seems to be much confusion about what the Alito opinion means. Conservatives say it's the right decision to protect life, and it's not a big deal because it just refers back to the states to make the decision. While liberals say that it impacts women's equality and takes us back to the 1960s women's rights. Both sides are correct. They are not mutually exclusive. But to understand this fully, we need to take a look at how we got here. On June 24th, all major news agencies were reporting on the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling to overturn the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade. Publishers like Reuters stated that the Roe v. Wade ruling recognized women's constitutional right to abortion. But that's not actually true. And that's where the confusion only starts. There are two very important things to consider. One, Roe v. Wade was never part of the U.S. Constitution, and any laws that are not part of the U.S. Constitution are fair game to be changed by the court systems. And two, which is the least understood but the most important reason, the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't actually have the authority to uphold Roe v. Wade in the first place. Rewinding back to 1973, when Roe v. Wade was won, the interpretation that abortion is part of the U.S. Constitution is actually quite weak. The justification lawyers used is from the 14th Amendment. In summary, they used the argument that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. This line ties very tightly to feminism and capitalism, but capitalism is for another day. Let's recap the 4 waves of feminism. The first wave is about fighting for the social, civil, and political rights of freedom. It ended in the 1960s with the granting of women's voting rights. The second wave is about stereotypical gender roles. Women didn't want to be confined to the kitchen and child rearing. They wanted full equality and to find roles and careers that were equal to men. By this definition, everyone should be a second wave feminist. There's no reason that any of us should truly believe that women belong in the kitchen or can't be CEOs. This doesn't mean that you have to be pro-abortion if you're a believer in women's rights, but it does mean that you have to support women's rights to choose, or else they'll never be fully equal. I'll explain what that means in a minute, but what I want to highlight here is that legal tools like Roe v. Wade and health tools like birth control and feminine products are things that enabled women to reach full equality. Third wave feminism was about sexual freedom, meaning no more sexual harassment in the workplace, no more slut shaming, and addressing the shortage of women in positions of power. Fourth wave feminism is where we are now and lacks a clear definition, which is often the case with ongoing movements. But I would suggest that it's something along the lines of addressing violence against women. Examples to consider include women rebelling against the hijab, the ban on driving vehicles, and widespread violence against women in non-westernized countries. So jumping back to the 14th Amendment, it says that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. So if we are to give women equality, we must give them the same liberties as men, right? Right. However, although that last line is true, it's not a strong interpretation of the 14th Amendment. When it says liberties, it doesn't mean any liberty anywhere. I can't walk over to your farm and shoot your cattle because I'm hungry. The same thing is with abortion. There's no mention of a woman's right to abort a pregnancy. There's no right to end the life of a fetus for anyone's gain, which doesn't really make it a liberty. However, we know that most Americans support abortion, so I would just make it part of the Constitution if it's so widely supported. Well, in 1973, when Roe v. Wade was being debated, not enough states supported abortion at the time. 75% of the 50 U.S. states need to support a change to the Constitution in order to make it permanent, also known as ratification. At the time, they didn't have enough support. So now let's move to one of these strong arguments, but against Roe v. Wade. This is the 10th Amendment, which assigns all powers not delegated to the United States or prohibited to the states to either the states or the people. If any sentence was to be confusing, I swear. This basically means that unless power was explicitly given to the federal government, it remains with the individual states. This is why Biden's student loan forgiveness plan has been stopped, and this is why Roe v. Wade was overturned. It's explicitly written in the 10th Amendment of the Constitution that the federal government cannot unilaterally impose a law on the states. There are some exceptions to this, but Roe v. Wade and Biden's student loan forgiveness program are not one of them. The President of the United States, the courts, and the legislature are not kings. They do not have unlimited power. There's no other way to slice this. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the U.S. can impose health decisions on the states. It's not within the power of the federal government. And you don't want this either. If they would create one law to allow abortion, they could easily create another to ban it. Or worse, they could start taking away other liberties, like restricting you to have only one child, like China used to do. Limiting the power of the federal government is a good thing. A chief aim of the Constitution was to create a government with enough power to act on the national level, but without too much power that fundamental rights would be at risk. An example of where this went wrong is in Canada. In Canada, it's illegal to call a transgender person by any undesired pronoun. Otherwise, it's considered a hate crime. Now, any reasonable person will try to respect someone's desire to be called something different. You want to be called a different name? Whatever, right? It doesn't matter. No one cares. We'll do it anyways because we're nice, reasonable people. That's not the point, though. The point here is that it was relatively easy to change the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is Canada's constitution, to impede the free speech of Canadians so that the choice to call someone by their preferred pronouns was no longer theirs. The difference between Canada and the US is how it was set up. Canada was set up as a federation, while the US was set up as a confederation. The difference is important. In a confederation, power is allocated to the federal level by the individual states. That's how in the US Constitution it says, unless power has been explicitly given to the federal level, it will reside with the state. A federation is the opposite. In a federation, power cascades down from the top. Canada still has checks in place to attempt to ensure that there is no federal overreach, but in many ways, they're insufficient. The difference between the two systems is important when trying to implement national programs like student loan forgiveness, gun control, or abortion rights. So where do we go from here? After the midterm elections, The Guardian published an article stating that American voters just sent a crystal clear message. They believe in abortion rights. We know this already. According to Pew Research, 57% of Americans disapprove of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. However, saying that the Supreme Court shouldn't have overturned Roe v. Wade isn't a smart thing to say because they had no choice. It was only a matter of time before some state challenged it and it would have been overturned anyways. But women also have the right to be pissed about this for two reasons. First, if you support second, third, or fourth wave feminism, you must also support a woman's right to choose. Women fought for the right to vote, then against sexual harassment and for equal pay, then it was sexual freedom, which is the third wave. And by the way, guys, it's in your best interest to support that one too. There are two things that enable a woman to achieve these goals. The first is health advancement like birth control, feminine products, and a woman's right to choose abortion. It's hard to become a CEO if you're getting pregnant all through your 20s. It's a non-negotiable that this was a major contributor to women advancing in the workplace. So to say that you don't support women's rights to choose is to say that you don't support women equality. If that's you, okay, but this is not the same as supporting abortion. You can say that women deserve the right to choose, but it doesn't mean that you have to agree with their choice. For example, I've known people to have cosmetic surgery. They have the right to do it, but I don't think anyone needs to get elective surgeries like that. They look wonderful just the way they are. But that decision is something they get to make, not me. The second reason women should be pissed is that you can't take away something that you already given. Some of you might be saying right now, well, yes, you can, they just did it. Yes, but it's causing a major headache that is a real tangible loss to someone that supports abortion. They've essentially had the rug yanked out from underneath them. Conservatives like Ben Shapiro say, look, it's not a big deal. It just goes back to the states to make the decision. That's true. It does go back to the states, but it is a big deal. Many states don't allow for it. Something that's really important to bring up is the fallout after an abortion. People make decisions they regret all the time. Check this out.
Does nobody talk about how hard abortions are on a woman? It's probably been a month. And I hate myself every day. It sucks because in the moment I felt like I was doing the right thing. But every time I'm going to bed or I'm just alone, I just think about like, what if? Because I'm not a child, like I'm an adult. So this shit just like hit me on a different level. I had all the means in the world to do it on my own.
One of the most overlooked but critical needs are support systems for abortion clinics. When you get a needle vaccination from a nurse, you're required to stay for 15 minutes to make sure that you don't have an adverse physical reaction. Why don't we account for psychological reactions? I feel for these women deeply. There needs to be better support for before and after they have an abortion. It's such a big decision, but the media trivializes it and makes it sound like it's just another simple tool for feminist freedom.
Yeah, in case you didn't get the memo, shaming people for their abortions is out. We're celebrating them now.
Abortions shouldn't be shamed or celebrated. It's a medical procedure that needs proper support. These are our friends, our sisters, our daughters, our girlfriends, and our wives. Abortions are just as much about the women as they are about the fetus. We need to start caring more. Conservatives don't have to support abortion, but they can't make the decision for them either. It flies directly contrary to one of the core conservative principles, which is to reduce government overreach, reduce the size of government, and reduce government spending. You can't have both. Listen, I get it. But you can't have a small government and government overreach. Those are two mutually exclusive things. In other words, you can't have heads and tails in the same coin flip. Think about that.